Well, hello, my putrid little ghouls. Obviously, Halloween is a-coming, and as you all know, that is my favourite time of year. And I bet you're all wondering what you can bake for Halloween. Well, I've got a little something you might like to try. So my friend's having a party, and she's got her Halloween dessert table on the go, and she's asked me to make something for the centrepiece. And she's already got things like meringue ghosts and intestine cupcakes and those little skeleton gingerbread men and all that jazz. So I'm going to create something that's either going to make people run a mile or scream with delight. It's my slime-filled, bubbling witch's cauldron cake, and it is easier than you might think to make, so let's get on with it. Now you can make any kind of flavour cake you like, just use your favourite recipe. I'm going to be using chocolate cake because it's my favourite, and I'm using 5-inch little round sandwich tins, so whatever quantity works for that. And to start with making my chocolate cake, I'm going to mix my dry ingredients together, and I have 250 grams of plain flour here, which go in the bowl, 275 grams of caster sugar, 45 grams of cocoa powder, and then 3/4 teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just gonna whisk that all together until it's nicely combined. And then I've got another bowl here, and I'm gonna put my wet ingredients into that. And I have 160 millilitres of cold coffee and 160 millilitres of buttermilk, 160 millilitres of vegetable oil or just any flavourless oil, and last of all, 2 large free-range eggs. And then using my whisk, I'm just going to mix those all together until it's nicely combined as well. And once you've done that, you just need to put the dry ingredients into the wet ingredients and then give it a really good mix. And all that remains now is to distribute it evenly amongst all my tins. And as I said, these are 5-inch tins, because this cauldron's going to be really small. So I'm just going to eyeball it, but you can weigh it if you want. And I'm going to bake these at 150 degrees C for about 20 minutes or until a skewer comes out clean when I poke it in the middle. Okay, so my cakes have come out of the oven and they're totally cool. And as you can see, they are quite dome-like. And that's because sometimes when you bake in really small tins, the mixture does tend to dome up quite a bit. So I'm going to chop the tops off of these. So I'm just going to do that by just using a cake leveler. You can use a bread knife. This is a much safer way of doing it. Right, so once all your levels are nice and even, it's time to start building it up. And I've got a turntable here. I would always recommend using a turntable just because it spins around nice and neatly and you can just do things a lot easier. So I've got also a little drum, a cake board. It's silver and I will disguise that later, but for now I'm just going to put a little bit of buttercream on in the middle. So on with the first layer. And you want to make sure you put it right in the middle of your cake board so it's nice and even. And give it a little pat on the top to make sure it's all stuck. And now the first layer of filling. So I'm just going to blob a bit of my buttercream, and I'm just using vanilla buttercream. It's just my regular vanilla buttercream recipe, and I have made it green because that is well ghouly. So blob a bit in the middle. And then I'm also using a cranked palette knife. This makes it a lot easier to get nice and level. I'm just going to spread that around until it reaches the edges. And don't worry at this point that it's all kind of smushing out all over the sides. This is not important. And just keep going with your layers until you've reached the top. Right, now with a straight palette knife, I'm just going to wipe the excess buttercream off the sides. But again, at this point, it doesn't matter if it's messy or if you haven't got enough icing on the sides, because this cake still needs to be carved, because currently it is nothing like a cauldron, is it? So once you've smoothed and scraped all that excess stuff away, pop it in the fridge or the freezer for about 15 minutes. That's going to make it much, much easier to carve. Okay, it's time to make this tall cylindrical thing into more of a cauldron shape. So I'm going to be using a serrated knife for that. This is quite a big one, so I'm going to be very, very careful of my fingers. And I'm literally just going to carve bits of the cake off a little bit at a time. And because it's been in the freezer for a bit, it's much, much easier. It's much less kind of likely to, fall apart in massive chunks, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go around cutting this corner off first. And then gradually just cut bits off at the top and at the bottom to make it more of a cauldron shape. Right, so my cauldron is sort of taking shape. It's got a long way to go before it really does look like a cauldron, but that's okay. The next step is to give it a crumb coat, and that's going to lock all the crumbs in before I put the sugar paste on, and also it's going to help the sugar paste stick to the cake. And I'm just going to be using my green buttercream again. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that this bit, it doesn't need to be neat and tidy. It really is all about just locking crumbs in. So now that this is completely covered in buttercream, I'm going to put it in the fridge for a minimum of half an hour to up to 2 hours. That's going to set this nice and firm and ready for the sugar paste. Okay, my cake has been chilling out in the fridge for about half an hour and it is nice and firm, so it's time to get on with the next bit. And for this stage, you're going to need a couple of extra special things, one of which is a super strong straw. This is actually for cake decorating and it's really strong. And then this thing, which is a single-use 100ml syringe, and it comes with a long bit of plastic tubing. You can get these online. I just went online and Googled syringe and tube. This came up, and this is absolutely perfect for the last stage of our cake. So get those to one side, and it's time to stick the straw into the middle, because this is going to make the hole that is going to be for this guy. Okay, so now I'm going to pick it up in my hands, which is why it's good that this cake is nice and cool and firm, because I need to make sure that the hole is going all the way through. And now I'm going to feed this tube into that hole. So I want to put this cake back on the cake board, but because this is quite fat, this tube, it's going to kind of make it all lopsided. So using the same straw, I'm just going to cut a little kind of channel for the pipe to sit in. And now I just need to pop it back onto my board. I'm going to put a little bit more buttercream on just because it's now covered in crumbs. And then pick up my board and try and put it on where it was before. And then, ta-da! Now don't worry that you've got all these finger marks here. We can smooth those out, no problem with the palette knife. But I am going to have to wash my now green hands. Okay, I've cleaned my hands and I've gloved up with my latex gloves, because I always prefer to use gloves when I'm using sugar paste, because it's much, much easier to work with and you don't make any kind of fingerprint impressions in it. And I'm using black sugar paste as well. It's pre-coloured. You can use white sugar paste with black food colouring, but you're going to need quite a lot to get it this colour, so it is much more convenient for you to buy it already black. And this sugar paste, the coloured stuff, is a lot stickier than normal white ones. So I'm going to use a bit of corn flour or cornstarch just under my sugar paste on my board, and also on my non-stick rolling pin. And I'm going to keep rolling it until I've got it about 4 millimetres thick. Okay, so it's time to start decorating. So I'm going to put my rolling pin onto my blob of sugar paste and just flop it back, just get it out of the way. Essentially what I'm going to do now is, just starting at the front so I can see what I'm doing, gently kind of lay it over. Now obviously I've got that piping tube sticking out of the top. I'm going to try and lay it over the top of my tube so that it kind of forms a natural hole. There it is. So don't worry too much about this, we can neaten this out. So I'm going to be using the palm of my hand rather than a cake smoother, just because this is a very irregular shape. And just gently, gently, gently picking up the skirt of my sugar paste, just kind of rubbing it on. Now I'm getting near the bottom now. I'm just going to use both hands at this point just to kind of make a little dip. Right, that's nearly ready, and now I've got a lot of excess sugar paste here, a little skirt. So I'm just going to use a little palette knife to just cut away the excess, but at the same time kind of tucking it in. And it kind of looks like a big black apple at the moment, which is kind of cool. Maybe I should have made a big black apple cake for Halloween. That would have been just as Halloween-y. But no, this is going to become a brilliant cauldron. So I'm just going to move that to one side for a moment. Now this is quite long at the moment, this tube, so I'm just going to use a pair of secateurs, or you could use some sharp scissors just to trim it. And now it's time to make this cauldron become a proper cauldron and not just a black apple. So I have a small piece of black sugar paste again. Just going to give that a little knead first to warm it up. And then I am going to roll a sausage out of most of it. I reckon that's about right. And I'm going to neaten the ends as well with a little palette knife. Just to double check, put that together. So to stick this on, you can use edible glue or something fancy like that, but I just use water and a paintbrush. So just very lightly, I haven't got this loaded with loads of water. I'm just gonna brush around the top and then carefully pick up your sausage, and you wanna make sure that the tubing is the back, and so the join of your roll is also the back. Just lay it gently over the top where you've put your water. Now this little join here at the back, you can leave that as it is, or what I like to do is to get a little bit of water and a little bit of sugar paste and kind of make a paste with it. And I can use this like a kind of filler. And it will look all shiny at first and all stringy, but it's really good when it dries. And once that's all nice and secure, I'm gonna make some handles. So I've got some more black sugar paste. I'm gonna make a couple of little sausages, just in exactly the same way. Right, that is looking much more like a cauldron now. So the next thing I'm gonna do is to decorate the base. Right, we're back and we're gonna finish this thing, and it's gonna be very exciting, and I'm simply going to cover this board with some orange buttercream. I'm using orange because I'm gonna cover it in Oreos, and then it's gonna look a little bit like fire. I've finished off my crumbs on my cake board, and I also put a bit of black ribbon around the bottom of my cake board just to cover that up. And now it is time to finish this guy off. Now I have some slime in my bowl. It's pretty slimy. I just made this by whizzing up some jelly, which I made in a food processor. If you don't want to use jelly, you can use a bit of lemon curd perhaps, which has been dyed green. That'll work just as well. But I'm going to use this because it's totally slimy. So first of all, I'm going to spoon a little bit into the top. And if you didn't manage to get any of the extra bits I used, like the syringe and the tube, then you could just leave it there with this cake. Just fill it up with the jelly or your lemon curd, and it would make a really, really good centerpiece. But if you did manage to get all the cool stuff that I told you about, then this cake is about to get much more exciting. So I have my syringe here. As you can see, it's full of slime. And if you're all ready, I'm ready. Let's do this. That worked exactly as I hoped. All wobbly and gross and potion-like in a cauldron. So this is a little bit fiddly, but that's okay. I know you guys can do it, and if you do it, then please tag me using #CupcakeJemma on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want other ideas for Halloween stuff, then don't forget I have done quite a lot of videos for Halloween. There's a playlist up there on my channel, so go and check those out. And if you haven't subscribed already to my channel, then please do, because if you do, you'll get alerts every time I do a video. And sometimes that's not always on the regular. Sometimes there's extra videos. I'm just saying that there might be extra videos, you know, around sort of special times. If there's any special times coming up, like Halloween, things like that. So do subscribe so you get those alerts. I will be back next week with a recipe for you guys. And until then, happy Halloween. Bye!